we go into a global famine, which I've been warning about.
Yeah, okay, so let's
months.
talk about this global famine, man, because I see that coming in the fall in a big way. And so my sense is, well, partly because of the Ukraine conflict and the fact that we're wiping out a big chunk of the world's wheat supply and fertilizer supply, that we're going to be putting about 150 million people under intense food pressure, really starting this fall. I think that's when it's going to kick in. And my sense is, well, there's no way that can happen without mass migration pressure on Europe, maybe of a scale that makes the last migration crisis look like virtually nothing. And so am I being paranoid about that? You seem to be thinking along the same lines. And you said you've seen this coming for about 3 years.
I think you're understating it, actually.
So what's going to happen in the fall?
I started warning in January of 2020, actually, and I've warned every day since. And I've at this point I warn about a half a dozen times a day. So war. Let's talk about war first. Pandemic, famine, war. The triangle of death. They always go together. If you get a big war or a big pandemic or a big famine, you'll get the other two. You get one, you get the other two. It's three musketeers. And all of these things, any one of them creates the HOP, human osmotic pressure, right? So these things go together. So when I saw this, I was one of the very first alerting on the pandemic, right? I was in January, in mid to somewhere around January 19th, I think I started warning about pandemic. And so immediately, having studied war for so many years, not just kinetic war and the shootouts and all that. I did that for years, back when I was quite skinny and running around out in the wars and all that. But there's also information war, which is the PhD level of warfare. And then there's these other components that people must study if they're going to be a serious student of war, which is migration, pandemic, and famine. They always go together, period.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, so let me ask you a question about that. So my sense was that on the pandemic front, that because we disrupted the supply chains, and we have by no means fixed that in the least. There's a shortage. You can't get a car in Canada. You can't get a motorbike. You can't get a personal watercraft. You can't get paper and cardboard for books. There's a massive backlog and lineup for everything. I know that one container ship in 5 is now snared at a port. And so I know what happens when you put pressure on the supply chain. The people who suffer for that the most are the people at the bottom of the economic hierarchy. And so those are going to be people that are barely hanging on in developing countries, especially in North Africa. That'll be my guess where this is going to have the biggest effects. And so, if you show a 1% increase in unemployment, you get a 5% increase in psychiatric hospitalization. And that's because there's a lot of people who are just barely making ends meet. And then if you double the cost of necessities like energy or, let's say, fertilizer, or we could even put in food, then you're going to produce a tremendous amount of economic pressure on these people, tilt them into starvation. And so we've seen what's happened in Sri Lanka, which is just an absolute bloody, major, significant ongoing catastrophe. 21 million people in Sri Lanka. There's no way we're going to be able to feed them in any real sense for any long period of time. So all that eco movement forward on the Sri Lankan front is going to ensure that those poor starving people are going to eat every goddamn animal in that entire country to stave off starvation. And then they're going to burn everything for fuel, because what the hell else are they going to do? So this idea that we can make people poor, hungry, cold or hot by scaling back food production and disrupting energy supplies, and that's somehow going to save the planet, is as backwards a conception as any dimwit could possibly formulate. And so, so what do you think is going to happen in the fall?
Massive famines. And, I went to Sri Lanka 4, 5, 6 years ago to have a look-see. I'm often just going and looking and checking the police and the food supply. And there was plenty of food. Sri Lanka had so much food. It was just like cheap and plentiful, right? And then the next thing you know, here we go. Now, famine.
It was doing well.
Yeah, one thing about famine. Famine creates famine in the same way that war creates war and fire creates fire. Famine creates famine. So when we go into these initial phases of famine, you'll see immediately, obviously, price controls will start to be enforced. This happens every time. It's happening right now in Panama in the last 48 hours, right? Price controls on gasoline and some other things.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
A lot of violence now in Panama. In fact, just minutes before you and I came on, I was talking with a friend in Panama about the current situation. That's how close I keep tabs on Panama. for various reasons. One is the Panama Canal. Another thing is for instance, when people are hungry, as you know, within 48 hours, they're going to hit the streets, right? And they'll start robbing the stores. They'll start robbing the trucks and the trains and the boats. And so then supplies stop going. Governments always start taking food from the farmers. They, without exception, in my study over the years, the governments always go for the farmers. And like in Egypt, recently forcing the Egyptian farmers to sell to only approved warehouses, that sort of thing. So people start robbing from the farmers as well, right? And then the farmers say, "Hey, I'm either bankrupt or I'm not making any money," and so the farmers stop farming. So that's how you see we get into the second season of this, right? And so the famine creates more famine, just like fire creates fire. And then famine, let's say you have 20 million people that are hungry in Sri Lanka. And as their nutritional, resources diminish, so too does their physical resilience. And now they're open to disease. Many of the people that die in famines actually die from things like, they call them famine fevers. One of those is typhus. Another is relapsing fevers. Cholera, which is not a famine fever, waterborne, of course, fecal. Anyway, the bottom line is many of the people, if not most, who die during famines are actually from disease. And then this causes that human osmotic pressure, and these sorts of things often lead to more war, right? So it's a recursive sort of, the factors just keep, it's almost a fission reaction, right? And
sure, absolutely.
And it's out of control.
Positive feedback loop. Yeah. Runaway, Pareto distribution problem, runaway catastrophe. Yeah, I get it. Positive feedback loops emerging everywhere. And why do you think, what are the factors that are driving the reemergence of the famine? You said there's a lot of instability in Central America, and so we're going to keep an eye out there. Obviously, Sri Lanka has collapsed entirely, and there's absolutely no doubt whatsoever that a major part of the reason that Sri Lanka collapsed is because the globalist utopians gathered the reins of government in Sri Lanka, because it was actually developing at quite a rate. And as you said, it had a lot of food and not a bad general income level just a few years ago. So this wasn't a catastrophic country to begin with. It was a country on the move upward, and it was completely scuttled by these globalist plans. And so what's contributing to the developing famine right now and where do you think it's going to be most intense?
Where will it be the most intense? That's something I think about every single day. One of the things I've learned in wars and in the study of war is whatever you think will probably turn out to be wrong.
Yeah.
You know this. I watch so many of your programs. The systems that emerge will present themselves in due course, right? What we can see is when I talk with Laura Logan, the famous correspondent, she'll say, they've been talking about, 1.2 billion, they meaning World Economic Forum, have been talking about 1.2 billion people forced to migrate. They've been talking about that for years, and it's true.
Yeah, and they're going to blame it. They're bloody well going to blame it on climate change. You watch. That's what they're going to do.
Absolutely.
You bet. Yeah. So 1.2 billion. 1.2 billion. So my estimation of 150 million is, you think, is optimistic.
I think highly optimistic. I would not be surprised, Jordan. I would not be surprised if by 2025, if 1 billion people aren't dead. I mean, we're really heading into the most epic famines that have ever happened in human history.
Yeah,
I watched this 7 days ago.
Man, I was looking at a Economist cover the other day, the Economist magazine, and it said 20 million people saved by COVID vaccine. And I thought, yeah, you bastards, for every million persons that you saved with the lockdowns and the whole vaccination, not the vaccination scam, but the pandemic panic, you're probably going to kill 50 because of supply chain disruptions and postponed starvation. And so, that's part of the problem with turning political decisions over to the medical experts is that, well, we save some people with the left hand and we doom 100 more with the right hand. And there is a lag. We basically tried to shut down the world's economy for 2 years as if we could do that because, well, look, everything's so plentiful, isn't it? Doesn't it matter at all that people aren't going to go to work. It turns out that it actually matters a lot. And so what are the factors right now that are contributing to this emergent food insecurity, quote, problem? Why are these people who were being fed not being fed now?
Let's talk about energy. Energy is another kill shot,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
and you
yeah,
see,
right.
This highly ill-advised war in Ukraine. I was in Lithuania last year warning about this over and over and over. I was down in Morocco with my friend, war correspondent Chuck Holton, and we called up Frontex, which is like the European Border Patrol, you might say. Their headquarters in Warsaw. And they said, Belarus, Lukashenko, the dictator there, is pushing migrants into Lithuania. And I had been with the Lithuanian army in Afghanistan. I called them up. I said, what's going on? And they said, hey, come on up. So I flew from Morocco to Vilnius, Lithuania, and I had full access to their elected officials, intelligence, the camps for the migrants and army, the whole thing. So for almost a month, right? So I was very well aware that Russia is up to something, and I was publishing that, right? And so we've gone into this war in Ukraine, right? And Russia is just, of course, obviously, Nord Stream is cut, right? Will it be turned back on? And now, as you probably are aware, we just had an explosion.
I wouldn't turn it on if I was Putin.
I wouldn't either. And, even Trump warned them about this years ago, love him or hate him. He was very clear about it. And we just had an explosion roughly a month ago at a Texas port, an LNG facility, which is critical, right? We were supplying liquid natural gas to Europe. This would have helped. You need this for the Haber-Bosch process to create many of the fertilizers, right? That natural gas is very important. Then we had an explosion and a pipeline explosion roughly 2 weeks ago in Texas. And then we just had another natural gas problem at a plant in Oklahoma. We've had 3, Oklahoma, 2 in Texas, right? Meanwhile, they're being shut off from Russia. And we've got a potential war brewing here, for instance, between Iran and Israel. Imagine where that could go on energy supplies. We're looking at...
Okay, so let's look at that for a minute. So I'm going to lay down a proposition here for all of you who are listening. If you are a friend to the poor and the oppressed and the hungry, the number one thing you want to do is drive energy prices as low as they possibly can be on every front that you possibly can manage. And that bloody well includes coal and petroleum and natural gas. And then we could add nuclear to that. And if you want to throw renewables in for the tiny percentage that they account for, you could do that too. But because energy is equivalent to work, and because work is equivalent to food and shelter, if you make energy expensive, what you do is you starve the poor. And you don't have to starve them very much before they become desperate and things fall apart. And then we fall into these positive feedback loops that Michael has been describing. And so when you hear these bloody globalist utopians talk about the necessity for higher energy costs, you remember that comes directly at the cost of the world's poor. Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, 2 weeks ago had the unmitigated and I would say quasi-demonic gall to announce publicly that $8 a gallon gasoline in Canada was actually probably a good thing, because Canadians should be reminded nonstop just how severe the climate crisis is every time they fill up their cars. And that's perfectly bloody fine unless you're living on the edge of your economic capability. And the fact that you can't afford to fill up your car anymore puts you into unemployment and food deprivation in relationship to your children. And that's in the rich West. And now in Europe, we're so goddamn stupid on our energy policy because of these idiot environmental schemes that we've made ourselves pathologically reliant on the Russians. And we're going to bloody well see what that costs us. And I know the Germans are burning coal again because their switch, massively expensive and counterproductive switch to so-called renewals, has been another catastrophe. And so now God only knows how expensive energy is going to become. And that's directly related to the provision of the famines that Michael is talking about. So get ready for this, folks, because it's coming down the pipes.
Jordan, Germans are collecting wood right now, as much as they can get. They realize this can be a very cold winter, right?
Yeah, this is going to be well, that's what I thought. The globalist utopian mantra, let the poor freeze in the dark. That's how you save the planet. It's coming, no kidding, man.
If anything can destroy the European Union, that'll be it. If Germany collapses, it's over, right? And, many of us have been looking at Greece and Italy and Portugal and Spain for years, wondering which one would go first. I thought it would probably be Greece, but we saw Italy looks like they might be the first to fall off the tree, right? And probably the other three, Italy, Portugal, Spain, Greece or Italy already. Greece probably will be soon to follow. These are the weak canaries in this coal mine.
I mean, it'll fall out of the European Union.
Oh, yeah. And now, look, Putin has just cut the gas for the annual maintenance. And of course, we've got Zelensky over there saying that, Canada should not send back the turbine to Germany. And he's inserting himself basically into the life and death of hundreds of millions of people. Zelensky, the actor. This is really, we've never seen something like that. If things continue, it's all about conditions. People often talk about sparks. What will be the spark?